Good evening, everybody. If you could please find your seat, we'd like to get started in just a couple of minutes here. Thank you.
All right, class, take your seat. Oh, good. I was hoping they didn't play musical chairs on you. So good to see you all back here. My name is Michael Leroy, and it's my privilege to serve Calvin College as its president for just a few more months. And then it'll be Calvin University. I'm not planning on leaving. So, yeah. I had you there, though, didn't I? But it's wonderful to see you come back. It encourages us immensely. And tomorrow I'll be looking out across the arena, and you'll be on the other end from me. And you cannot imagine what it is like to look into the faces of mostly 22-year-olds sitting down, and you all look like 22-year-olds from the other end. And so it'll be great. And but it's incredibly encouraging to know that you care enough to come back, and I am really very, very grateful for your devotion to Calvin, your engagement with Calvin, your support for the institution, and so I just want to come and welcome you myself. I'm sorry I can't stay for dinner. This is about 16 events in about 30 hours that I'm speaking at. And so I'm off to the honors convocation in just a moment. But there's a lot of energy on campus right now. It's a very, very positive time to be here and be together. And so thank you. I thought with a class of 69 coming, we're prepared for protests. So we're all ready for you. So it should be a good time. No tear gas. We're just tears. So but we're so pleased that you're here. We look forward to seeing you in the arena tomorrow. Now I'd like to introduce the MC for tonight's evening, and then you'll have devotional word and you'll be able to get on to dinner. Andy DeVries. To introduce him, he graduated from Calvin in 1969. In case anyone was wondering, he did graduate. And Andy has lived into many different callings. He spent 12 years teaching and coaching basketball, track, and gymnastics at Jenison Christian, while also developing a physical education curriculum for Christian Schools International. And then he left to start up a telecommunications company where he remained for 12 years until the company sold. In 1998, Andy resumed his time at Calvin College to teach marketing and develop an internship program in the business department, a program that even today is an essential and valuable part of the business program. And in fact, strong employer relations and internships for everybody, this has become very much a part of our vision for a Calvin education here. He had a near fatal motorcycle accident, but came back from it strong, and it was really great to see him today, where he's also got a very attractive facial hair to which I am very partial. So he spent time working in development office and then retired from Calvin in 2015. In addition to this very busy life that he has lived, he served on the Calvin Alumni Board, officiated soccer games for 50 years, pursued graduate degrees at Michigan State and Central Michigan, and served for 25 years as Charter School Board President. Andy has enjoyed 48 years of marriage to Kay Grahn from the class of 72 and has been blessed with 3 children and 8 grandchildren. And we could say a lot more about Andy, but please help me in welcoming your classmate and MC tonight, Andy DeVries. Thank you. It's good to
Well, here we are. So remember 54 years ago, maybe 55 years ago, maybe September, we've got that book. It's called the Bod Book. That better? Okay. Remember the Bod Book? You looked through that thing and you tried to find out who all the girls were. And the girls, and Grace just lied that she said the girls did not look at it, but I think they did too. And then you'd tell your friends about this girl and that girl, and I'm sure the girls did the same thing. And in place of the Bod Book, now we have Facebook. And we're doing the same thing because Facebook was invented for old people. It wasn't invented for young people. You go on Facebook, and everybody except Gail Einfield, Dama, has Facebook. So Facebook's been a whole new world of connection for us and keeping in touch with all of you. And then the other thing that I thought, just in general, is 50 years ago when we graduated, about this time, there were a whole bunch of really old people in the gym, and they were our grandparents. And now it's us. So here we go. We'll have some time for reminiscing afterwards. Under your salad, there's a sheet, and there should be some writing implements near it. Please take some time during dinner to write down remembrances of your time here. And then the other members of the committee, Grace and Dave Krulin and Dirk and Sharon Pigman and Larry Gerbins, will pick those up, and then we'll share those with you. It's on the back of what you're holding. Yes. Hey, there's also a cool little flipping coin, and you can use that to redeem that for parking tickets with Annie afterwards. Having said that, I'd like to welcome Don Klopp. If you remember Don, he was one of our fine tennis players from Calvin Christian, and he is one of, I think we have 7 or 8 clergymen who graduated in our class, and Don will give the opening invocation.
Thanks, Andy. I'm going to read a story that, or an event that you're all very familiar with. It's actually based on a devotional. Maybe some of you do this Reformed Journal devotional. If you're not aware of that, it's a wonderful one, and you can, I'm sure, Google it, and they do a daily reflection. And this one is by a guy named Steve Mathene Vanderwell. He's a fellow pastor with his wife at the Second Reformed Church in Iowa. And it's one from shortly after Easter. And I try to think of reunion stories in the Bible. And I thought of David and Jonathan. They made a big plan at the end of their life, and I thought, well, that's kind of involved. But I like this one. It's about Mary and Jesus. Then the disciples went back to their homes. This is after they'd seen the open tomb. But Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw 2 angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but he didn't have a name tag on. So she did not realize that it was Jesus. We're glad we have name tags at our reunion, right? So you can pretend you know people. Woman, he said, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. What a wonderful reunion for Mary. The reflection that Steve does a nice interplay between future and past. And of course, at a reunion, that's what we're doing, isn't it? We're asking each other how you've been, where you've been, what you've been doing, what you're going to do. We're looking back, we're looking forward. And as he saw that in Mary's life, we can kind of see it too, I think. Looking back, for her, her past was locked. She remembered the master, she remembered the teacher, and if it's the Mary Magdalene that we think is the Mary Magdalene who had the 7 spirits exorcised from her by Jesus, she has that memory, but it's all just there in the past, kind of locked away, almost untouchable, certainly unchangeable, until Jesus calls her name. And then her future is suddenly wide open, where before it had been locked away, closed, and full of fear. And in a strange kind of way, her past maybe gets opened up as well, in a new way. And all those thoughts by Steve followed from a recollection that he had from what he called his favorite theologian, Jim Allison. And Jim Allison said this: the resurrection of Jesus means that our future now is sealed and fixed. And it is our past that is still open to re-understanding and reordering. And that's sort of counterintuitive, isn't it? I mean, how do you change the past? If you missed that key shot, well, you can't go back there. If you went to that party that you shouldn't have, well, you did. And if you didn't finish that paper or dropped out of a course, you know. And we're hearing lots of stories with each other about what we did and what we didn't do. And the ones I heard this afternoon, and maybe many of you are in that boat, had to do with a draft, right? What was your number? So it would seem that the past is there stuck and unchanged and unchangeable. But this theologian, Allison, suggests it's really kind of the opposite. It's our future that's secure. It's our hope that's secure because Jesus has called our name. And then we can go back to the past and we can revisit it. And some of it's light and airy and fun. Some of it, of course, is heavier. But it's good. It's good to remember and say, oh, that's what moved me that way. Or that's what deepened my life. Or that's what helped me with that decision. And I hope you're doing that with each other. And, you know, tonight at the meal, take opportunity to do that. The memories that Andy's talking about, we can take advantage of that. And some of those memories are heavier and harder. We've had losses, our parents, a spouse, a child, someone who's away and not back. But those too have a way of being reordered and reoriented and revisited in a way that, well, that maybe kind of changes them. And this is something else I read by Richard Mouw. You all love Richard Mouw, I'm sure. and he's telling a story about South Africa, and a little girl and his teacher asks her, if you had to define memory, what would you say it is? And she says, memory is the thing that helps me forget. That's kind of profound, isn't it? Maybe revisiting even the very painful parts of our story has a way of airing it, and then maybe being able to remember it less, or at least with less pain. Our future, because of the fact that Jesus calls our name, is secure. Our hope is secure. And the past, well, it's open for us to delve into and to revisit and to reorder and to reintegrate and even to reinvigorate us all. Let's thank God for that, shall we? God, we thank you that you have called our name and that our hope and that our future is secure. So secure that we can go back to reintegrate and to reinterpret and to reinvigorate our past and find from it again encouragement and hope there as well. We ask now that you would bless our time of eating and talking and fellowshipping. Enrich us all, we pray. In the name of Jesus, amen. Well, I've been asked to say that we hope you enjoy the meal.
I fall in love too fast. I fall in love too terribly hard for love to ever last. My heart should be well schooled, 'cause I've been fooled in the past, but still I fall in love so easily. I fall in love too fast. heart should be well schooled, 'cause I've been fooled in the past, but still I fall in love too easily. I fall in love too fast. the touch of your lips, upon my face, your lips that are cool and sweet, such tenderness lies in their soft caress. My heart forgets to beat the touch of your hand upon my brow. The love in your eyes that shine, and now at last that moment divine, the touch of your lips on mine. the touch of your hand. Upon my brow, the love in your eyes, a shine, and now at last, that moment divine, the touch of your lips, the love in your eyes, the touch of your lips. to meet you. I will never free you. You're here with me to stay. You're mine, you are mine completely. Love me strong or sweetly. I need you night and day. Arm in arm, hand in hand, we will be found together. Heart to heart, lips to lips, we're chained and bound together. I own you. I don't need to buy love. You're a slave to my love. In every way, you're mine. Arm in arm, hand in hand, we will be found together. Heart to heart, lips to lips, we're chained and bound together. I own you. I don't need to buy love. You're a slave to my love. In every way, you're mine. I get along without you very well. Of course I do. Except when soft rains fall and drip from leaves, then I recall the thrill of being.
Excuse me, in about 5 minutes, we're going to start collecting these. So if you could start wrapping up and prepare them for the committee members to collect. Thank you.
But I get along without you very well. I've forgotten you just like I should. Of course I have, except to hear your name or someone's laugh that is the same. But I've forgotten you just like I should. What a guy, what a fool am I to think my breaking heart could kid the moon. What's in store? Should I phone once more? No, it's best that I stick to my tune. I get along without you very well. Of course I do, except perhaps in spring. But I should never think of spring, for that would surely break my heart in two. Just friends, lovers no more. Just friends, but not like before. To think of what we've been and not to kiss again seems like pretending it isn't the ending. Two friends drifting apart. Two friends, but one broken heart. We love, we laugh, we cried. Suddenly love died. The story ended, but we're just friends. Two friends drifting apart. Two friends, but one broken heart. We loved, we laughed, we cried. Suddenly love died. The story ended, but we're just friends.
time we say goodbye, I die a little every time we say goodbye. I wonder why a little, why the gods above me, who must be in the know, think so little of me, they allow you to go. When you're near, there's such an air of spring about it. I can hear a lark somewhere begin to sing about it. There's no love song finer, but how strange the change from major to minor is.
Could you hold your talk for just a second? I had a thought, and I'd like to share it with you. Those of you who don't hear well, please turn up your hearing aids, and the rest of you turn off your phones. I thought that if we collected all those things, and then I tried to make heads or tails out of them, I probably wouldn't do very well. So what I thought I'd do is I'll make some general comments about my recollections and the things that we talked about at our table. If you look at your sheet, cross off the things that I mentioned, and if I miss something that you have, then have you come up and share that with the group. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So I think at this point we're ready for Rick. Is Rick here? Okay. This is Rick Truer. He's the Director of Alumni and Community Relations. Before he came to Calvin, he was the assistant to Paul Henry, right? Yeah. And got a great resume, and it's a real pleasure to have him here with us. Rick?
Thanks, Andy. And I first got to meet Andy when I was going to Rotary for Congressman Henry and Congressman Naylors a long time ago. So it's great to be with you here tonight. I just wanted to give you a little update on what's happening at the college and soon to be university. So as you know, this is the last couple months of Calvin College. And on July 10, we will be flipping over to Calvin University. And the reason for that is many. There are already several graduate programs that Calvin has, and we also have our centers and our institutes, and in many ways we're already living into a university structure. And the other change that's happened a lot in the past 50 years is the student body has changed significantly, and we now have students from over 65 different countries on campus. And internationally, college will often mean an academy or a junior college. And it isn't quite as prestigious for them when they go home, or they won't even consider looking at a college because they want to go to a university. So there are many reasons for the name change, and we're looking forward to July 10 when we actually make that change. It'll be John Calvin's birthday. You're all welcome to come back that day as well. We'll be having a panel discussion around 2 o'clock, a dedication ceremony at 3, and then sort of a carnival out on the Commons lawn at 4 o'clock with some food trucks. So you're all invited to come back on July 10. And you've already met President Michael Leroy. He's starting, I think, his 7th year here at Calvin now, and he's just been a great addition to the Calvin College community. In his short time here, he's already led us through 2 strategic plans, a campus master plan, and also our Vision 2030 process, and has also put the college on a very strong financial footing. So we're very excited about his leadership. This is one of the other things he did was help get everybody on campus and all the students to know Calvin's mission statement. And so I'm putting it up here for you because we hear this all the time on campus now, and it is really ingrained into us that, Calvin College equips students to think deeply, to act justly, and live wholeheartedly as Christ's agents of renewal in the world. And you'll see it all over campus, and it is great to have you all back on campus because you're the living examples of living out that mission and what Calvin has prepared you to do. This is what I just mentioned, Vision 2030, one of the processes that Michael Leroy led us through. And this is where the idea of becoming Calvin University started being discussed again. It had been discussed quite a bit in the 70s, but then came back into the discussion just a couple years ago. And so this was going to be the plan that we would do this by 2030, but the Board of Trustees last year said, why wait till 2030? Let's just do it now. And so the name change is happening this year, but the next 10 years will be where we're actually living into that vision and changing some of the structures and the programs on Calvin's campus. And this is just a graphic for you. So I thought I had mentioned how the student body has changed a lot over the past 50 years. And so here are the last names, popular names on the campus from the 70s to 2010. And so you can see how it was very Dutch heavy back in the 1970s. But now the most common surnames on Calvin's campus are Lee and Kim. So the student body has changed significantly, and if you'll see that tomorrow at graduation as well. The other thing you'll notice when you go into the field house into the lobby tomorrow, all the flags from all the countries where our students are from are hanging in that lobby now as a visual representation of that. This is the second strategy process that Michael Leroy just led us through, and I thought I would just put this up for you. You're not going to be able to read through it right now. It is on our website, so if you'd like to look for Calvin's strategy for 2019 to 2025, take a look at it. And this is what we're going to be living out in the next 5 or 6 years, and then we'll come up with another strategic plan in 2025 that will bring us to the 2030 to help fulfill the living out the Vision 2030 plan. And this is just a picture from the Calvin Prison Initiative. We are now in our 3rd year of teaching classes at the Hanlon Correctional Facility in Ionia, and we sort of consider that a second campus for Calvin College. We have 60 students that are in the program there. They're all prisoners. They have to apply for the program to be in it. And if they are accepted in the program and they're in a different facility, they're transferred into the Hanlon Correctional Facility, and they're earning a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree in ministry leadership. And the warden there has told us how this has just made a significant cultural change in the prison, and that these students are looked up to by the fellow prisoners. The number of violations that they've had to issue in the prison has decreased tremendously. And these students are just so grateful for a Calvin education. One of the benefits that they get from this is that they actually get to give to their children the Calvin Legacy Scholarship. So if their child decides to come to Calvin, they'll get the $4,000 scholarship for being an alum, a child of an alum, and they have just found that so amazing because many of them have said, I've never been able to give my child anything. And the fact that Calvin is there and changing their lives has just been so meaningful to them. And we're actually now have 2 of these students who've been released from prison and are studying on campus with our other Calvin students. This is a picture of the career services staff and our new career services director, Charita Johnson, and she's leading this great team, and they are transforming the way that we're doing career services for all the Calvin students. Calvin has a distinctive path-breaking approach to vocation and career readiness through the Calvin Life Work program. And what we're doing is we're giving students extracurricular studies every month, different modules, so they can learn life skills such as how do I get a loan when I graduate? How do I handle my finances? How do I network at a dinner? What's the proper etiquette that I should use? And also, how do I create a good resume? How do I interview for jobs? How do I have a good online presence and online profile, all those types of things. And the students, excuse me, the students love the program. In fact, we've heard from some students who decided not to do it how much they're regretting the fact that they didn't sign up for it, because you have to be in it from the beginning in order to qualify for the $3,000 scholarship that you get your senior year if you take all of the modules. This, does anybody know where this is? It's in the library. What's happening in the library right now is they are building a new coffee shop. And so there's going to be a coffee shop in the library that's going to open this August. So if you're back on campus, we'd love to have you come and have a cup of coffee in the library. Probably a little bit different from when you were a student, I would imagine. This is an aerial view or rendering of the nature preserve, the ecosystem preserve just north of here. We just went through a renovation of that and an updating of it. This is the approach to it. It looks a little overgrown, and this is what it looks like now. It's to be a little bit more welcoming, and also all along the right side of the photo there's going to be native gardens to help people learn how to garden with plants that are native to the area to help control rainwater runoff and to prevent invasive species. And last year, we finally got lights on our soccer field at Calvin College. So we can actually play night games now. So it is great because it's extended the life of the field, and students no longer have to leave class early in the middle of the day to go play a soccer game because they can play at night. And it's been a lot of fun for us. We had homecoming out there this year, followed by fireworks, and we're going to be doing that again this fall. And you're welcome to come back on October 4 and 5 for homecoming as well. With the name change, we knew that we had to update the signs to Calvin College to say Calvin University. So this is a rendering, you're some of the first people to see it, of what the new approach to the Burton Street entrance is going to look like. So right now in the center where the yellow trees are is where the current Calvin College sign is. But this is where, this will be the new Calvin University sign that will be located right at the entrance. There'll be a nice patio in front of it so that people can stand in front of it and take their picture instead of having to climb through the tulips and stand next to the sign like they currently do. So we're excited about that. We've also, now that you're celebrating your 50 years, we're just celebrating over 50 years of off-campus programs at Calvin. It's amazing to think about the legacy that Calvin has had when it comes to off-campus programs. We're like number 2 in the nation for the number of students who study overseas at some point, and we have a very strong program, and we're currently looking actually for a new director for it because our current one is moving to Australia to direct a program there for the Coalition of Christian Colleges and Universities. I just wanted to name a bunch of different ways that we'd love to have you get involved with Calvin College and stay connected. And one of them is through our sponsor, Square Inch campaign right now. This just rolled out this week. You can go on to sponsor.calvin.edu, and for $10, you can claim your square inch of campus and sponsor it. So it's a fun and interactive way to help support the annual fund and support all the students here at Calvin College. What's amazing is our donors just make a huge difference to us. In fact, we just found out this past year that because of the number of scholarships that we have and the amount of donations that we've had, the student loan debt for each Calvin student has actually gone down $3,000 over the past couple of years. So that's incredible considering the cost of education keeps going up. But the fact that we've been able to lower the price that a Calvin student is going to have to pay is incredible, and it's because of the donors that we have that are so generously giving back and because of the amount of financial aid that we can give to our students. This is another way that you could help Calvin College is if you have a grandson or know someone in high school, granddaughter, who's looking at colleges, we'd love for you to recommend Calvin College to them. You can go on their website and get an application. Even if they're living someplace else, we offer travel vouchers for them to visit Calvin's campus, and we will help pay for that trip to come here. This is another thing that you can do. We have Bible studies online that all of our Calvin students a lot of them are participating in campus-wide Bible studies every semester. And right now we're offering one on the Sabbath. And the materials are all online for any alums, any parents, any students who want to use them. They can go to the campus ministries page on Calvin's website and download the materials. The nice thing is that there's no homework involved. You can download the materials and actually discuss them with a small group if you have a group at home that you would like to put together to do a Bible study. And these are just some other ways for you to get involved. We've got the January series. We've got remote sites all over the country for that. The Worship Symposium happens here on campus every year. The Festival of Faith and Writing happens every other year. It'll be happening next spring. We'd love to have you come back for that. And CALL has, the CALL program, which is the Calvin Academy of Lifelong Learning, has over 2,000 students enrolled in it. It's actually one of the fastest growing programs at Calvin. And over half of the people that are taking classes there have had no contact with Calvin College before signing up for a class. We're looking through the Alumni Association to find more ways that we can bring these types of resources to alums all over the world, because we know that the alumni population is changing and that they are dispersed all over the world now. And so we just started offering CALL classes online and remotely. We had our first one with Nick Walterstorff teaching a class on justice this past spring. And this fall we'll be having another 2 classes, and we're also going to try to start rolling out some online book studies as well, so that people have more ways to engage with Calvin College no matter where they are in the world. So that is my brief update. Thank you so much for coming back to Calvin College and soon to be Calvin University, and for being such faithful living examples of Calvin's mission. Have a great time.
Thanks, Rick. Makes you feel really good about being a Calvin alum. The other day I was going down to the mailbox, and our neighbor, Chris, said to me, "I got to talk to you about my grandson." And I thought, I'd like to hear about your grandson. I knew that he was a senior at South Christian, and that he was looking for his next avenue of study. And she said, I said to him, "So where are you looking?" He said, "I'm not." And she says, "Well, don't you want to look in California or something?" He says, "No, Grandma, I'm a Calvin man." And I thought, wow, that is so cool that already as a senior in college or high school, he's a Calvin man. And that's who we are. That maroon and gold runs deep. And the longer I'm away from Calvin, the more I appreciate it. And today was especially, it was a very special day for me. I know that at the 45th reunion, I talked about the issues that I had, my near-death experience, and my experiences connected to God and Jesus. And for those of you who weren't here, I had a bad motorcycle accident. I had 44 broken bones, and I spent a long time in the hospital, and my liver failed, and I needed a transplant. And during the 3 years that I was waiting for a gift of life, I lost my memory. It's called encephalopathy. And the toxins and the ammonias and the poisons going through my body stripped my brain of recall, and I forgot just about everything. And after I got the gift of life, the first thing I knew was that I didn't know. I went into that not knowing that I didn't know, and I woke up knowing I didn't know. So I had to learn how to read at 55. I had to learn how to do math at 55. I had to learn everything at 55. And when I met with you today, and not all of you, but I had extended conversations with quite a few of you. And I don't know if you noticed, but if I talked to you, I looked into your eyes quite deeply to try to recall, how do I know you? And that part of the memory is still coming. My last 20 years is really foggy, but I do remember Calvin. And I remember 5 years of being here as some of the greatest years of my life. And sometimes I thought that part of my life will never be over, but I loved being here. And I loved getting to know all of you. And you were such an impactful part of that. And as I looked at people like Jack and Sandy Van Ens, and I looked at them and I thought, okay, come on. It's in there. Come on, Andy, remember this. And all of a sudden, it was a tsunami. It was just boom, and all that memory came back, and I remembered them from high school and things that we did there, and then after that. And as we did this exercise, and what do you remember? Karen Zeiderman was taking notes. I remember Karen and Sue, they were roommates, right? And I think I met you as freshmen, and you guys were so much fun. And even now, I look at you and I see you as 19-year-olds. The things that I remember were things that you probably wrote down because your memories are intact and mine is building. But as you wrote things down, I'm sure that most of the guys, when remembering the time from 65 to 70, wrote down the draft. Remember that the Selective Service kind of owned you. You turned 18 and you had to tell them that you were 18. And then they got your grades. And if your grades weren't stellar, above 2 point, they would tell somebody else. And they would tell the draft board. And no sooner had your parents got your grades than the draft board had your grades. And how many of you had to take that bus ride down to Detroit? Look at this. We took that bus ride to Detroit, and it wasn't a fun ride because it was at that point where pretty much you were going to be cannon fodder or you were going to hopefully get a 4F. And then about 2 years later, they came out with the numbers. And I think we were juniors when they did the numbers. And I bet every one of you can remember where you were at that time. I remember my number, it was 317. Kay and I were at a party with some friends and we remembered the numbers, and we made a beeline back to the home, and everybody was in our rental home on Lake Drive in Fuller. We must have had 50 guys around the TV, and we missed the first 50 numbers. And so it got into the 250s, and I thought, oh no. And then the 300s, and I thought, it's over. And then 317. And I thought, I might be home free. And I was. But some of you, depending on what state you were in, if there weren't a lot of guys in your state, you weren't home free unless you were way over 250. And how many of you lost friends in Vietnam? And how many of you had roommates who came back and they weren't the same? They were in really rough shape. I remember having a terribly difficult test in anatomy and physiology with Professor Van Harn. And I love that guy, but he didn't cut anybody any breaks. And I needed a B to get a 2 point that year. I had to have a B, and I wasn't anywhere near a B. And he said to me, "You're worried about the draft?" I said, "I am worried about the draft." I said, "If I don't get a B in this test," I said, "I'm gone." I said, "What's most important in this class?" And he said, "Probably DNA." And I said, "What would I have to know to get a B?" And he said, "You would have to prove to me conclusively that you completely understand DNA." I didn't even remember what it stood for. I had two roommates who were the smartest kids I ever came across. One was Todd Mikesell. I said, "Toddy, do you know anything about DNA?" "No, but I can figure it out." And so the price for him staying up all night was a 12-pack. 6 now and 6 later. And Todd taught me DNA. I literally memorized it. He went over it and over it and over it and over. We stayed up all night. And I got into that classroom, and I didn't even open the blue book. I just start writing DNA. And I did everything. And then Todd had said, if you know DNA, why don't we learn RNA too? So I wrote down RNA. I was the first person finished with my exam. I handed it to Van Harn. He looked at me and he said, "You're good." And I thought, wow, hard work pays off. But the people at Calvin, the profs at Calvin, they cared. And I found that over and over and over with the profs that cared. They're just wonderful professors. We talked about some of them at our table. And in preparing for tonight, I had a lot of friends who couldn't make it tonight. And I asked them to write down some of the people. I don't know if any of you remember Ed Wieringa. Ed was a friend of mine at Calvin, and he's a philosopher somewhere now. Does anybody know where he is? In New York. Okay? And Rochester, okay? And Ed Wieringa said two things. He said, I had some of the best professors I've ever had. He said, he identified Nick Waltersdorf as one. And I don't know if any of you had him, but he was an amazing man. And then he said, and don't let my moment at the mic go without saying something about the GR biters. And for those of you who don't know that term, that was a term that wasn't kindly applied to the students from Grand Rapids who lived home. And they made life kind of difficult for those who lived in the dorms, because the GR biters lived with mom and dad, and they never really experienced the Calvin experience of living with others in community. And that name has stuck for years and years. So thanks, Ed. I also had a note from quite a few who are ill right now. Maybe some of you remember Ken Miedema from Massachusetts. And Ken asked that I extend his greetings to you. Ken had blood clots in his lung, and he's on oxygen right now. And he called about maybe a half an hour or so ago and asked, will you please extend my best wishes to all of you. So if we're on live stream, hi, Ken, and best wishes to you, Ken. Also heard from Grace Oldenbrook. Grace is having difficulty with hips, and I heard from Jim and Jerry Kett. They're traveling, and Dale Havman is traveling. So there's a bunch of people that wish they could be here and couldn't. We also have a list on the back of the call to worship, if you will, of those who are no longer with us. And some have passed quite some time ago, and some more recently, but I think it would be appropriate to have a moment of silence in memoriam to our classmates who have gone on. Thank you. There were protests at Calvin. How many of you were involved in a protest? Remember the protest when Spiro Agnew was on campus? I think it was maybe, could it be 67, 68? It was just before he decided that he wasn't going to be vice president any longer. And he was on campus, and there was a mass protest. There must have been 1,500 protesting that. How about compulsory chapel? Who can honestly say, in addition to me, that they paid somebody to check their name off? It was a quarter, for me, it was a quarter a time. And it was at Franklin campus, and it was $1.25 for a week. And I worked in the morning, and so I made $2.50 an hour, so it was well spent. And then remember when we moved to this campus, and they had that little guy scurrying around with the camera? We'd all be in our assigned seats, and he'd start on one side, and you'd take that Polaroid shot, and then another, and another, and another. And if you got there late, like I did once, and I ran to that seat over there because he hadn't taken all the pictures yet, and I could prove on the picture that I was there, but I got docked because I wasn't in my seat. And that ignited a protest on my part against compulsory chapel. And it was on the stairs of the building on Franklin Street, and Wood TV got there a little bit late. And I had this beautiful sign that said, "Oh, come all ye faithful, or else." And that was on the front page of the Grand Rapids Press. So the or else was me, and I got a week's vacation. So I've covered the protests, and what's interesting is that since compulsory chapel is no more, compulsory chapel has become much more relevant. And compulsory chapel is something that the kids enjoy going to. The music is relevant, the speakers are great, and it's, if you have a chance, go sometime and tell me, or let me know if you don't get tears, because we fought it and they like it. Our kids really enjoy it, and that's special to me. So at this point, my reminiscing has ground to a halt, and we'll start with Karen's table. And if you have anything on your sheet that I haven't covered, why don't you come up for a second and take a few minutes and explain it. This is my friend Karen Zeiderveen-Rupke.
Hello.
Right?
Yes.
Okay. And we had more fun than you could shake a stick at.
We had a lot of fun, but Andy took a lot of the best jokes. Because when we were talking about compulsory chapel and we were talking about all the shenanigans we had to share and trade with somebody, he came up with the solution of just paying somebody $1.25 a week. It's like, who knew? We were too poor. But we did have a lot of fun reminiscing, and we talked a little bit about the protest, and Sue shared when Dick Gregory came and was not allowed to come, but he was allowed to go to Hope. And the Chimes wrote a story counting how many times he said hell or something else, and as opposed to the speaker who did come to Calvin. And Dick Gregory evidently said hell one more time than the speaker we had at Calvin, to which Chimes said he was a hell of a good speaker. We had a lot of fun talking about pranks and, of course, giving ourselves lots of credit that they were just exquisitely played out. They weren't harmful, and they were just so much fun. Light bulbs being unscrewed, stages going up and down unexpectedly, music coming from the roof of the admin building on Franklin Street. I didn't have anything to do with any of them. I really didn't. We talked about the dining hall and family-style dining, right? Cattle call, didn't we call it the cattle call? The girls going in first and then the boys kind of looking to see where they were going to sit. Enough said. We played a little Dutch bingo at our table and found out that Sue is a cousin to a good friend that Sandy knows. It's not Sandy, Kay, thank you. And the last thing I'll bring up is we talked a little bit about interim. We didn't talk about interim. I talked about interim. I'm still angry about it, and I'm going to let it go. I think 50 years, maybe I'll let it go.
Thank you, Karen. Hey, this table?
We don't want to forget about Chimes, do we, and all the uproar that they managed. Freshman year, the Chimes won a National Investigative Journalism Award for breaking the story of how chapel checkers were being bribed to excuse attendance. Here's one not from a young man student. Rules, rules, rules. As a free, independent woman, I can't believe I wore skirts to class, sat boy, girl, boy for dinner, got back to the dorm by 10 p.m., and I did not smoke. We still managed to have fun and make great friendships. And then, who was the most scintillating, the most magnetic, the most powerful speaker in the classroom? For some of us, it was Edgar Bouvet. Edgar Bouvet was absolutely magnetic. The largest classroom we had on campus in the early days of Noel Crest, the seminary, he packed it out. He exuded enthusiasm. And for all of us as Greek scholars, you know that enthusiasm comes from two Greek words, to be in the Spirit. He exuded the Spirit of God through his creativity. You hung on every word. And you did that because he habitually thought not in concepts, but in pictures. And what do I mean by that? He was extraordinarily subversive. Because the Calvinist tradition, with its emphasis on doctrine, is wordy, 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 conceptual, conceptual, conceptual. And he introduced us to art that there are more ways to touch the sensibilities of the human heart, of the human mind, and of the human soul. Edgar Bouvet died in February. If you come to chapel tomorrow morning, it will be 3 weeks to the day that there was an extraordinary memorial service in that chapel led by Neil Plantinga and Walderstorff. And for my money, you can't do any better than those two to speak at your memorial.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
Dean Dahmer.
Yeah. We're going to keep this a little lighter. We're going to focus on Moses.
Yes.
So I don't know how many of you remember, but it was a homecoming game. And one of the traditions, if you were the class that took care of Moses for a while, you had to show it at homecoming. So this was either our freshman or sophomore year. And everyone's watching the game. I think we were playing Hope. And all of a sudden, right during the game, a couple panels come out of the ceiling, and down comes Moses. Right down. But they kept it like 12 feet off. And the students are kind of running out there, but you can't quite reach it. And then they had this whole plan. I think this was the sophomore class that had it at the time. They pulled it back up. They took a fake Moses, ran it off so people could kind of see it, put it in a convertible and ran off with it. But in reality, it was still in the up in the attic, which some people found out later and took it away from that class. So one other Moses story is our class, the class of 69, finally did get Moses. And so we had it for a couple years. And so we'd have these meetings. And we had to plan for how we were going to show Moses at homecoming. So we gathered at someone's apartment, and someone, I don't know who they were, they brought some beer. And so as the evening went along, there were a few more beers consumed, and then it turned into, well, I think we ought to show it tonight. And so we did a couple of those, and we actually ran it through the first floor of Norderwehr Hall one night, and then we made sure we took a couple freshman students and parked them along Moses and took a picture to prove that we had done it. And Roger Helder actually wrecked his car on one of these fine showings. So anyway, we had a lot of good times showing Moses and ended up passing it on to another class. Thanks.
Thinking about Moses,
This
what,
is Mary.
Marty,
Marty, sorry.
that's okay. Thinking about Moses, it's a shame. I talked to my freshman granddaughter who goes here, and she said she knew nothing about Moses. So he died somewhere along the path, which is sad. One of the things that somebody brought up was about the seminary. And how many of you ever went parking in the seminary parking lot? That is no more, huh? Yes. One other thing I was just thinking about is the sophomore year, how many of you lived in Schultze Hall? And it was incomplete yet. And so we had to live 4 in a room and share the bathroom with 8 people, 8 women for that matter. And then finally, after about 2 months, they finished the 3rd floor and we could move up into our rooms. And speaking of pranks, I didn't quite follow the whole thing, but 2 of the people at our table pranked their girlfriends, fiancés, into telling the other one, or telling them that the other couple was going to get married earlier than they said they were. But they wanted to test whether the women could keep secrets, and they did. So they had to keep this thing going, and finally they had to confess that, no, they weren't getting married earlier. Okay.
Thanks, Marty. A little more on the death of Moses. Moses was the party that we had to decide how to show Moses convened at Forest Hills Inn. We had every big guy who was a senior parked in that dining hall where all the Grand Rapids kids hung out, and we brought Moses in. Ed Mosley was a part of that, Gene Bratt was, I was, and every other big guy. And we got into that building, and the freshmen and sophomores knew it, and they slammed the door behind us. So we were trapped, and we literally fought our way out the door by the other door, and it was ugly. It got really, really fisty. And the cops came, and it was the Kentwood cops and the East Grand Rapids cops, and there were so many blue and red lights flowing. And I remember Jack Vandermel said, my eyes, as he got hit by that spray that they do. And the Moses ended up, I think, in Bob Medema's trunk, and he was flying through the campus, and they had just put in underground sprinkling, and the bottom of his car got ripped up, and then people were chasing it, and Moses just got hammered. I think Jim Marsh got a piece of it. I had a piece maybe the size of a quarter, as did maybe 100 other people, and that was Moses. So that's why kids don't know about it anymore. Okay, Dirk Pegman, one of our the members of our committee. Thanks, Dirk.
Yeah. How many of you were in the Go-Go Club? Anybody remember? Okay. The Go-Go Club was a uniformed group of Calvin students that sat at the Calvin games. We wore yellow shirts, and we had a college tie, you know, maroon and gold, and we had these berets. I have mine out in the car. I didn't have the guts to wear it in. I don't know why I had the guts to stand up here and talk to you, but anyway, it's out there. It's got a few moth holes in it. Pete Howard had told me he has his too, but he didn't bring it from Colorado. But the Go-Go Club, I want to tell you our famous cheer. We would wait until there was a particularly bad call, and then I don't remember who our leader was. Do you remember who our leader was? Tom Chen. Yeah, right, Tom Chen. He would go out there and he would start the cheer, and we'd all say S, and then we'd say H, and then we'd say I, and then there'd be this big pause, waiting, and then somebody would say R, T, our famous shirt cheer. Go-Go Club was fine. If you looked at the 1967 yearbook, if you have that yet, they have a picture of me standing up. I think I was saying nice things to the referee, but I'm standing up pointing at the floor with my go-go hat on. Those of you who lived at Knollcrest but had classes at Franklin Street know that there was a bus that ran between the campuses. One night, and this is a personal story, but you can at least relate to the bus. I was dating Sharon, and she was living on Franklin campus. Was that right, Sharon? No, we were at Knollcrest. Whatever, we had to get back, and it was like she didn't have hours because she was a counselor in the dorms. But we still had to get back, and it was midnight, and the driver didn't show up for the bus. And so having experienced driving large vehicles in Chicago, I worked for a garbage company during the summer. I figured, well, I'll just drive this bus. And so I drove it from Franklin Street back to Knollcrest and just left it at Knollcrest. It was pretty much, you know, the same kind of vehicle, just a different load. One other thing, when we were talking about protests, I don't know if any of you were part of this, but when Martin Luther King was assassinated, there was a march around Franklin Park then, and Sharon and I did that. It's now Martin Luther King Park. If you went to the Franklin campus today, you were right near there. But that was a semi-protest that we experienced. Probably, you know, at our table we talked a little bit about the professors that we learned from, that we, you know, appreciated. And one of the things that, and I say this somewhat in jest, that I appreciated and learned, I learned from my RA in the dorms. Once again, guys didn't have hours, as you know, girls did. And he decided one night that we needed an education, so it was 2 a.m., and he packed about 6 guys in the car, and we went down to the Pantland Hotel, which was then kind of not so nice. And his idea was that we would go into the butter wagon. Is that what it was called? The Knife and Fork. And this was Hans Morsink. I don't know if you remember Hans Morsink, but he took us down there, and he wanted us to see where people went after the bars closed at 2 o'clock. And we got a good look at, and he wanted us to see the street, the women of the street as well that stopped in. So that was part of my freshman education. As well as living with Con Dauma, who was a piece of work in himself. Con, just before he came to Calvin, he had one eye removed, and he didn't have is that a prosthesis, Dave? Something he put in his eye. And what's they ask Gerbens, yeah. And he announced to me when we arrived at Calvin that I would have to put drops in his eye every night, which I don't do blood. And that was terrible. He also pulled some other pranks that I could talk about, but it was kind of fun living with Con. He lasted a semester, and then I don't know whether they thought I would be a good influence, but then Harry Tenbrink, I don't know if you know Harry Tenbrink, but he only lasted the second semester, and then he dropped out. So it's amazing. I don't know. They let me be an RA the next year, so I don't know what that was all about. Have I covered it all? somebody at our table mentioned, and maybe you remember, before they built, was it Rooks? Is it Rooks Eldersville? Rooks Van Dellen. There was a great big hole there, and Dave Coops remembered that it was some guys from Muskegon, but I think it was Ben Essenberg. He went home for the weekend. He came back, and some people, I don't know who, filled his room with newspaper. I don't know if you remember this, but they just absolutely packed his room with newspaper. And when Ben got back, I think it was Ben and his roommate, they decided, what are we going to, well, there was a paper drive in East Grand Rapids, by the way, to collect all this newspaper. So they filled his room with newspaper, and Ben got back, and he didn't know what to do with it. So we brought it over the hole that was going to be Rooks Van Dellen, and lit it on fire. Huge fire. And then, of course, like good arsonists, you stand around and wait for the fire engines to come. So I got a good education at Galvin.
One of the things that we talked about were dorm water fights. And I don't know how many of you participated in those, but yeah, I mean, they were wild. But I remember coming back from class and having to get to another class in a real hurry, running down the hallway. Oh, John Hartog, by the way, from Gallup, New Mexico. And running down the hall, didn't realize that there was water on the floor, slid into the door jamb, split my leg open, wound up having to go to Franklin campus to get stitches. The other thing that we remembered was using trays from the dining hall during the winter and using them to slide down hills. And then there was a recall for the dining hall trays because they were running out of them. And one of the other things, and I think this happened on our freshman year, but during homecoming, each of the dorms was responsible for making floats. Do any of you remember that? Oh, we did. And we made a phoenix. And won first prize for that. And so, and the other thing that we remember, because John DeVries is back there, and he was a fellow soccer player, and Jan DeRuse is here. Remember bus trips and stopping at Windschuler's for dinner. Oh, how we liked those out-of-town trips. They were really good.
Do you have something back there? Come on up. Jerry has. Welcome to the mayor of Benton Harbor.
Yes, no, St. Joseph,
St.
Stevensville.
Len Smith.
I'm Len Smith, currently living in Stevensville, Michigan. Reference was made earlier to Edgar Bouvet, and I also will talk about James DeBoers, but I don't know why I took history of art, because that was something that really didn't appeal to me. But I took history of art, and I thought Edgar Bouvet was outstanding. And I'll never forget the enthusiasm, and some of you who took history of art might appreciate this, but I'll never forget the enthusiasm as he described Goya, the Spanish artist, with execution of the rebels and the lighting and all this type of thing, and he was just great. And it was not about 5 or 6 years after that we were traveling through Europe, and talk about being at the right place at the right time. We were looking at Rembrandt's Night Watch in the Rijksmuseum, and I turned around, and who do I run into? Edgar Bouvet. And the second professor was James DeBorst, political science. This was during the height of the Cold War, concern about communism and communism spreading, concern about the domino theory, if Vietnam falls and what other countries might fall, and a rationale for going into Vietnam, which many people opposed. And there was that concern. And I remember during one of his classes, he said, to my surprise, what we really have to be concerned about is not so much communism, but the extreme right in fascism. And then another thing of a personal nature, I can remember when I was dating my wife, Beth Goldsword, who attended Calvin for 2 years. And we had gone, I think, to a Calvin basketball game. And after the game, we went out and found one of my favorite parking spots eventually. And I had my father's car, which had power seats. And I can remember reclining those seats quite far back, as far as they would go. This was on a Saturday night. And wouldn't you know, the seats got stuck. Can you imagine my uncomfortable feeling as Beth and I sat in the back seat and watched my mom and dad in the front seat driving to Neyland Avenue Christian Reformed Church with a better view of the ceiling of the car than the road ahead?
Approaching the dais, Jerry Whittington.
Hello, his name was Bruce from California. We met him. Bruce Snapper. Bruce Snapper, he met myself and Moses and Mosley, and they called him Moses. And Bruce, he impressed upon us one night, since we don't have hours, it's a weekend, let's go downtown. You remember the song? Downtown, things will be great. He wanted things to be great, so downtown. So we said, okay, let's go. So that's 6 guys in a car, my car. And I just got in a brand new car, 1960 car, in 1965 from a salesman. Daddy got a car because I wrecked the other one. So we were driving downtown. He wanted us to give him a tour, downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan. California, what do you want to see here in Grand Rapids? So he took him down, and that was the night that I didn't know if I'd ever make it back to Calvin College alive. Bruce hung his head out the window and started yelling at this guy in the next car at a stoplight. And the traffic light, they had so many cars in front of us that we couldn't move left, right. We couldn't go anywhere but where we were at. And Bruce is hanging out the window. Hey, you so-and-so. I said, Bruce, chill, And this guy's drunk. And he says, and he cursed a lot of nice words. And he got out of the car. When he stood up, he was a big, huge guy. He was a fighter with the Golden Gloves. You heard of Golden Gloves? This guy was big. He was a heavyweight fighter. And he challenged Bruce to a fight. Of course, Bruce, he slides back into the car. He shuts up, and somebody save me, And I reached under my seat. We didn't have a radio there. I reached under my seat and got my radio. It had a handle on it. And I stepped out and I said, he's got a problem. Please let us go. Well, with that, we couldn't go anywhere. We were there. He was about to break through the window, seriously, and take Bruce out. He would have never made it back to California. So I looked back at Bruce like, I'll never take you anywhere again. Moses got out, Ed Mosley, and he thought twice about proceeding, but he had his mind made up. He was going to break that window and get a hold of Bruce Snapper. And it was going to be another story for me to try to explain to his parents what happened to him in downtown Grand Rapids, where there was no way we could have gotten out of that traffic. Bruce, you know him. Do anyone remember Professor Miller? Thank God for Professor Miller. When I was on my way to Vietnam, Professor Miller saved me. 1969. He came to me. I didn't know anything about this. He came to me and says, Jeremiah, I'm going to get you a scholarship at University of Michigan. I said, you are? He said, yeah. A full ride scholarship? He says, yes, they got a new program there. And it's in counseling. And you have a psych degree. I dropped out of pre-med because of Vietnam War and all these things. I couldn't think straight. And so I had dropped out of pre-med. I was in psych. And he says they got a counseling program there, and higher education guidance and counseling, U of M, and they condensed the program from 2 years to 1 year, an advanced program, and I can get you in there because your grades are good. At Kelvin, you only have a B, but there it's an A. I said, what? I says, I'll take that. So he says, let's get you in there. You just fill out this application, get everything set up. All you have to do is fill out this application, Jeremiah, and we're gonna get you there, boy. You know. And I said, well, thank you, Bruce. Well, it all worked out. I got out of the Vietnam War for another year. God bless.
Next up is Pat Heels-Hosting.
Okay, how many ed people do we have here? Education teachers? How many of you remember John Daling with his babies? And that's all I remember, his babies. He was so progressive that we were just entranced by his babies. He made him out of a handkerchief. Can you still see him there, rocking his babies? That's all he taught us about babies. It was child psychology, but we all knew how to rock a baby. Well, it was a time of rigidity, I guess is the word I think of. And I grew up in Northwest Iowa. You don't know rigidity till you've grown up in Northwest Iowa, where you know what TULIP stands for and are questioned on it. You confess that you would never join a lodge before you could make profession of faith. And you wouldn't dance. And you wouldn't play cards. I told a little lie on that one. And you wouldn't go to movies. How many of you remember your first movie? Uh-huh. And in the movie theater, was your heart palpitating, wondering, what if Jesus were to come? And in the middle of my first movie, my husband took me to, he polluted me with The Sound of Music. And in the middle of the movie, when the nuns are helping them escape, I'm thinking, Jesus would love this movie. And then I was so polluted that I hardly care what I saw. Hell's Angel movies at the drive-in, I was not leaving till I saw the last one. And then how many of you remember some of the funny names? But this is the one that I'll never forget. Rudy Vlardingerbrook. And in the dining hall, Mike DeBoom, who was in charge of the breakfast shift, where sadly I had to work and be at work 6:45 in the morning. And some of you were running up and down the hallways in Beats Hall, and I couldn't get to sleep. But anyway, Mike DeBoom sang, Rudy Vlardingerbrook for president. How many of us would love to have Rudy as our president? Now, Gloria Vendracht, who is much, much more evil than I, because I was not part of this, but she remembers panty raids in the dorms. I kept those panties in the drawers. They were not going to get mine. So I don't know what happened with those panties, but how many of the guys here did panty raids? Nobody's admitting it. Gloria, who was it? Yeah, there was Dirk Pegman, we should have known. And then you've been talking about Ed Bouvet, and do you know that, probably about 4 months ago, he was still coming to the MVP Sportsplex, dressed to kill. His white shoes, his snazzy jacket, his personal attendant driving up in this fancy car. And I told him, Ed, do you know how much we loved you and your teaching? He beamed. He just beamed. And when we heard he had died, you know what was the first thing I thought about? Not clerestory lighting, although he taught us that. Not the flying buttresses, though he taught us that. I thought about how we counted how many changes of clothes he had in the semester. That was my best math experience at Calvin.
Pat, do you have more stories? How about the table back there? Do you have something? Here? How about back there? Back there? Okay, here we go. This is Ray Dennis.
How many of you remember Earl Strickwater? I've got to share a story. It's a personal story. It's a true story. I had him for history, and one semester he assigned us a 7 to 10 page typewritten report due every week. And I'd get these papers back, B minus, C plus. And a good way through the semester, I thought, how on earth can any one person read all of these reports in such depth? So for my last report, it was on the Crimea War. So one Saturday morning, I went to the library, pulled every book that I could find on the shelves on the Crimea War, prepared this beautiful bibliography, wrote the paper extemporaneously, made sure I had footnotes, ibid, the whole deal, got it back, and I had an A minus on it. He taught me something, that one of the most important things, and it's what Calvin taught us, was how can you think outside the box? One of the things that I remember, too, is sitting in the Commons, and in those days there were a lot more Canadian students here because the exchange rate was more favorable. But I remember C.B. Van Houten and Brenny Van Dalen and how much they liked to argue and talk about politics, and how I was constantly reminded that they always seemed to know more about U.S. politics than I did. Unfortunately, I was one of these students that got caught up in the draft, and so I was just getting ready to enter my senior year, and Uncle Sam drafted me. Why? Because my local draft board wouldn't defer me any longer, and I wasn't going into ministry, and I wasn't going into teaching. So I had to take a hiatus of a couple of years, which included a tour in Vietnam. And in the meantime, I was married, went overseas. I remember telling my wife, I said, don't worry, I'll be back. And I did come back. But you know, not all your memories from college are always the best memories. And I remember one March day in 1969, sitting in Dr. Bolt's class in the administration building on Franklin campus, when there was a knock on the door, and I got called out and was informed that my wife's brother had been killed in Vietnam. So when I look at that memoriam for our classmates and everything like here, there's a sadness, too, that so many have gone already. And I look around this room and think, boy, we're blessed. We are so blessed as a people. And I just give thanks to all of you.
Anybody from these tables back here? Okay, great.
I'm not sure I can read this writing.
This is Glenn Coops.
Glenn Coops, Atlanta, Georgia. So, you know, it was a long time ago, and I have some memories from those days, and I can't always be sure that they really happened, or maybe this is just something I made up, or maybe it was urban legends or something. But I have questions about, does anybody remember anything about all of the dining room chairs mysteriously being on the roof of the dining hall? Or how it was that the silverware from the dining hall went missing and they had to serve us with plasticware for a few days until the silverware finally showed up in the trunk of Bill Spoolhoff's car? Did I just make those things up, or did some of those things happen? You remember that there was a tradition, or I think there was, that if somebody got engaged to be married, you threw them into the seminary pond. You remember that? We did that. I remember I was in on a few of those. So when I was a sophomore, we had a room in the new Van Dellen Hall. We were kind of near the door. And we were all settled in there real nicely. It was probably October or so. And we had a real nice speaker stereo system, big speakers. Remember those huge speakers that we used to have? And we had decided we were going to make some hard cider. So we got a jug of apple cider, and some scientist in the group told us how to do this, and we had tubes and things bubbling, and we stuck it inside that speaker. Now this is highly illegal, So we're all studying there one evening at about 8, 9, 10 o'clock and knock on the door. And in walks Dean Lucas. And he's just, it's a brand new place. He was just making a little tour, just checking on to see how you guys like it and everything else. Well, he parks himself down and he wants to talk. And, we kept looking at this. Pretty soon he goes over there and he says, "Hey, this is certainly a really nice speaker you have. What kind is it?" And he starts looking behind it. Somebody had to, push some books off the desk or something like that to get him. We were so relieved when he finally left. We thought we were busted for sure. So we have one of the ladies at our tables recalling when 6 of them went out for dinner in a Volkswagen Beetle, all 6 ladies. 2 people in the front, 2 people in the way back, and 2 people in the boot. They were all, in those days, they said they were all skinny enough to do this. So. Those are our memories from our table. Thanks, everybody.
You have one? Great. By the way, Ray, thanks for your service, and everybody else, too, that was involved in that miserable conflict. Thank you.
I'm Henry Coy from London, Ontario. When I came to Calvin, they put a whole bunch of us Canadians in Franklin dorm because we had grade 13, 5 years of high school. And most of us had, I don't know, half a year's Calvin credit because they transferred that and so on. And Knollcrest was filled to the rafters, so they said, let's put all these Canucks in Franklin dorm. And of course, we were a little more liberal than you people, right? So we would say shit. That was part of our vernacular. And we liked beer. And we all smoked. And we find out that President Spoolhoff, who hung out in Franklin campus all the time, he didn't like cigarettes. So every time he saw you smoking, he'd come along and snip it. So anyways, and then heard about Dean Lucas, and the other lady was talking about rigidity. And I found out personally that, Dean Lucas had no sense of humor. Because I had a room on second floor on Franklin dorm, corner room, and it was facing the library and the admin building, and you had the sidewalk coming down there. And it was homecoming. I think it was class of 53 or something like that. So, and the theme was a spark in the night. And we know back then, the guys were the knights and the ladies were the nighties. So we made up this sign and we hung a floor lamp out there, and it was all illuminated on Thursday night. It says, "Welcome, nighties of 53. The guy you're sleeping with now once slept here." And then we asked the question, is there still a spark in the old night? Well, to say the least, I had an 8 o'clock history class, and when I came back from my 8 o'clock class, my sign was gone. And Mrs. Kerner, who was our house mother or whatever it was, she told me I had to go see Dean Lucas. So I went over to the Heckman building where he hung out, and he told me in no uncertain terms that, this was locker room humor and had no place in a fine institution like Calvin College, and this was insulting to our alumni and so on. And, you guys worried about the draft, but I was almost getting sent home, so. How do you tell that to your pastor who recommended you to go, right? But anyways, he took a dim view of my locker room humor, but he let me stay, for which I was grateful. But I found out then that Calvin was pretty uptight place, and and certainly concerned about PR and all those types of things, right? So I learned that early in the game. So, but I found that Calvin was really a formative place, and we talked about Charlie Miller. I had Charlie for a number of courses. And Bruce Snapper, he lived in our Franklin dorm for a year. I remember Bruce, he was across the hall, a rather unconventional fellow. And one of you talked about Conrad Duma. Well, I think Con came back second year, and he lived in Franklin dorm. And he would amuse us at parties, right? Hey, watch this, And he'd plunk out his eyeball, and so... You want to hold it? No, not really. So lots of good times. And anyways, there's some of my personal memories.
Did we miss anyone? Okay, before we close, I had a recollection about Dr. Spoolhoff. And what an incredible leader he was. The foresight that he had to purchase this land with the other people on that committee and to build Knollcrest before Franklin became obsolete. And the ways that he orchestrated the direction of this college is just historical. he was a really interesting man, a brilliant leader, and he was a really smart guy. In fact, I found that out in 1968 when my friends and I had gone to Florida for spring break, and the weather was horrid. It rained every day. And we had a carload of guys and a carload of girls, and we stayed in this big room in Fort Lauderdale and just watched each other get wet. And we were on the way home, and the weather broke, and we were near Atlanta. And the weather broke, and about the same time, there was an interruption on the radio station. It said, "We're sorry to interrupt this program, but President Eisenhower has died." I think I'm correct on that date of '68, and we'll have a moment of silence in his memory. And so I said to the guys in the car, "I wonder if we'll have some days off." And we said, "Well, let's call Spoolhoff." So we pulled off, and I remember getting into a Shell station, and there's a payphone, and we all collected quarters and dimes and nickels, and we had enough to make a call to Calvin College. And we directly dialed into his office, and he said, "Hello." And I said, "President Spoolhoff," I said, "I know that you're very fond of past President Eisenhower and of all the things that he did to help us win the war. And out of honor and memory of him, we were wondering how many days of mourning we would have." and he said, "Where are you, son?" I said, "We're at a payphone at the Shell station in Orlando." And he said, "Just a minute, let me figure something out." He said, "As much as I dislike you driving on Sunday," he said, "the way I figured, if you put your pedal to the metal right now, you'll be home in time for that 8 o'clock class." So, well, there's another side of the story that I think is funny, because I got out of that payphone with my friend Ed Huizinga, and there were 8 people wondering what he said. And I said, 3 days. So 5 believed me, and 5 didn't. So we switched cars around, and 5 had 3 of the best days of my life at Calvin in Florida, and the rest got to take their English course and their physics course. We have memories. So with that, let's end with memories, and that would be the singing of our alma mater. Do we have a pianist? Oh, yay. Carol, thank you. Thank you to the committee. Thank you, Dave, and Grace, and Dirk, and Sharon, and Larry. And thank you to our our hosts from Calvin, Paul, and Drew, thanks for all you've done. And God's blessing on all of you as you return to your hotel or wherever you're staying, and we'll see you tomorrow.